Welcome to the overview video for Chapter 14, Baroque Music in the Early 18th Century. Your learning objectives are number 1, to summarize the careers, describe the musical styles, and name and describe some of the most significant works by Antonio Vivaldi, Francois Couperin, Jean-Philippe Rameau, Bach, and Handel. Number 2, to compare the music of these composers to that of their predecessors and contemporaries. And 3, to understand the basic principles and structures of a concerto. The 18th century moved from continuity with the past to radical change. In Italy, opera remained the most prestigious type of music, but instrumental music was gaining ground. Venice remained a home to all types of professional and amateur music making, including public festivals, opera, church music, and chamber music. The instrumental concerto was a new genre that emerged in the 1680s and 1690s and became the most prestigious Baroque instrumental genre. In the orchestral concerto, the first violin part and bass dominated, and the texture was less contrapuntal than in the sonata. More important were the concerto grosso, which contrasted a small ensemble, or concertino, with a large ensemble, or concerto grosso, and the concerto for one or more soloists. In both, the full orchestra was called tutti, which means all, or ripieno, which means full. Giuseppe Torelli, 1658 to 1709, was a leading composer in the Bologna school, and he treated soloists as adjuncts to the orchestra. He helped to codify the concerto as a work in 3 movements, in the pattern fast, slow, fast. For the fast movements of his violin concertos, Torelli often used a form like the A section of a da capo aria, in which 2 passages for soloists are framed by a recurring ritornello. The Italian style of the last third of the 17th century was widely imitated and became the foundation for developments in the 18th century. Antonio Vivaldi, 1678 to 1741, was the best-known Italian composer of the early 18th century. Born in Venice, Vivaldi was trained in music and the priesthood. Between 1703 and 1740, Vivaldi worked at a home and school for orphaned or poor girls called the Pio Ospedale della Pietà, where he taught and composed and maintained the instruments. He composed oratorios, sacred music, and instrumental music. Receiving opera commissions from Venice, Florence, Rome, and elsewhere, he earned a great fortune but spent almost all of it. Vivaldi is best remembered today for his concertos. Written for the Ospedale, the concertos allow those of all abilities to participate. In his concertos, Vivaldi used a simple but flexible plan that allowed him to achieve variety through ever-changing combinations of a few basic elements. He used different groupings of solo and orchestral instruments to achieve a wide range of colors and sonorities. Most of his concertos feature opposition between soloist and orchestra. Vivaldi used mainly the 3-movement plan, fast, slow, fast, which became the standard for concertos over the next 300 years. For the fast movements, Vivaldi used ritornello form, in which the orchestra plays the ritornellos and the soloist plays the episodes. The opening ritornello is composed of several small units, and later ritornellos usually include only a few of those units. The opening and closing ritornellos are in the tonic, and the others confirm the keys to which the music modulated during the virtuosic and idiomatic solo episodes. Vivaldi was the first concerto composer to make slow movements as important as fast ones. Some of the concertos were written on commission, and to attract buyers, many were printed with fanciful titles and programs. Vivaldi had a great influence on later composers of instrumental music, including J.S. Bach. Paris was the musical capital of France, with public concerts, private patrons, and institutions. In the early 18th century, the relative merits of French and Italian music were debated by some and blended together by others. Although he worked for royalty, Francois Couperin, 1668 to 1733, earned most of his money teaching aristocrats and composing harpsichord suites, which he called orders, for amateur performances. Couperin blended French and Italian styles in his chamber music. For example, he combined the Italian Sonata da Chiesa with the French dance suite in his Les Nations, The Nations, from 1726. Jean-Philippe Rameau, 1683 to 1764, was both a theorist who founded the theory of tonal music and a composer who was Lully's most important successor. Rameau was almost 40 years old when he first earned fame with his theoretical treatise on harmony, Traité de la Harmonie, 1722, one of the most influential theoretical works ever written. Because of the laws of acoustics, Rameau considered the triad and seventh chord the primal elements of music. He asserted that the fundamental bass, in modern terms the progression chord roots, defined the harmony of a passage. Rameau coined the terms tonic, dominant, and subdominant and formulated the hierarchies of functional tonality. He recognized modulation but deemed that each piece had one principal tonic key. Rameau was the first to bring these ideas together in a unified system, and since his time they have become the primary tools for teaching musicians. Rameau's composing took longer to be recognized, and in the 1730s he wrote his first opera. Wealthy and influential patrons supported Rameau, who, despite his late start, composed more ballets and operas than any other French composer of the 18th century. He attained his greatest fame from operas such as Hippolyte et Arcis, 1733, and Castor et Pollux, 1737. Lully's supporters, known as Lullists, criticized Rameau's early operas for their difficulty. Rameau was defended by Ramists, and in the early 1750s, even his former opponents praised him and as the champion of French music. Rameau's theater works resembled Lully's in several ways, but they also introduced many changes. Rameau's melodies are often triadic, outlining the harmonies, which he drew from a rich palette of chords. The instrumental passages of Rameau's operas were especially original, with tone painting, novel orchestration, and independent woodwind parts. Rameau moved smoothly between recitative and aria styles, and frequently included choruses. The conclusion of Act 4 from Hippolyte et Arcis illustrates the high drama Rameau could achieve by combining all these musical elements. German and Austrian composers rose to prominence in the 18th century by combining musical traits of Italy, France, Germany, and Austria. In Germany, states, principalities, and independent cities supported music. Many aristocrats in 18th century Germany pursued music avidly as performers and as composers. Johann Sebastian Bach, 1685 to 1750, was little known outside of Protestant Germany during his life, but he is now considered to be one of the greatest composers ever. He absorbed the major genres and styles of his time, blended them in new ways, and developed them further. He was born in Eisenach and came from a large family of musicians. A virtuoso keyboard player, his first positions were as church organist at Arnstadt and Mühlhausen. Subsequently, Bach served as organist and then concertmaster in Weimar, and then as music director at Kürten. At Leipzig, he held one of the most prestigious positions in Germany as cantor of the St. Thomas School and civic music director. In all, Bach composed in almost every current genre except opera. Bach composed primarily to fill the needs of the positions he held. In Leipzig, Bach had multiple duties, including teaching Latin and music at the school, composing and rehearsing music for services, conducting the top choir and orchestra, and providing music for civic events. Bach learned composition by copying and arranging other composers' music. In his own works, Bach composed by inventing the principal theme or vocal melody and then elaborating it. He often revised and reworked completed compositions. As a church organist, Bach focused on genres employed in Lutheran services, drawing on a wide variety of models as he developed a distinctive style. By 1700, some composers were prefacing fugues with separate preludes, toccatas, or fantasias. At Weimar, Bach arranged Vivaldi violin concertos for keyboard and adopted ritornello form and other Vivaldi qualities in his own works. His fugues resemble ritornello form, with the fugue subject functioning like a ritornello theme. Bach wrote over 200 chorale settings for organ. His Orgelbuchlein, Little Organ Book, compiled at Weimar, contains short chorale preludes. In each prelude, the chorale is stated once, usually in the soprano, accompanied with counterpoint or embellished through a variety of compositional techniques. In some images in the choral text are suggested through musical figures. Bach wrote harpsichord music in every current genre. Each of the 2 books of the Well-Tempered Clavier consists of 24 preludes and fugue pairs in each major and minor key. Each prelude assigns the player a specific technical task and illustrates different types of keyboard performance conventions and compositional practices, while the fugues comprise an array of fugal writing techniques. The harpsichord suites show French, Italian, and German influences. Other genres of instrumental music composed by Bach include sonatas and concertos. He wrote 15 sonatas for solo instrument and harpsichord, which may have been written for the Collegium Musicum in Leipzig. Bach's works for unaccompanied violin, cello, and flute create the illusion of a harmonic and contrapuntal texture. Bach's 6 Brandenburg concertos, dedicated to the Margrave of Brandenburg in 1721, follow Italian models but expand the forms. Around 1700, Erdmann Neumeister, 1671 to 1756, devised the Lutheran Church cantata as a series of recitatives and arias, meditating on a biblical text and closing with a chorale. Composers setting such texts to music blended elements of choral settings, solo song, the sacred concerto, and opera. Church cantatas were performed during the service after the gospel reading. Bach directed the performance of a different cantata each Sunday in Leipzig, alternating between St. Nicholas's and St. Thomas's. Bach completed at least 3 and possibly 4 complete cantata cycles. Bach's second cantata cycle for Leipzig consisted of cantatas whose words and music were based on chorales. His cantata, Nun komm der Heiden Heiland, is typical. The opening chorus mixes genres, concerto and chorale motet. The movements for soloists are diverse types of aria and recitative, and the last movement is a harmonized chorale. Bach also composed motets, passions, and Latin service music. For the St. John Passion and St. Matthew Passion, he drew on elements from opera, cantata, and oratorios to recount the story of Jesus' death. In the 1740s, Bach produced a number of instrumental and vocal works that demonstrated all of the possible uses of a unifying musical idea. The Goldberg Variations contains a variety of techniques such as canon, fugue, and quodlibet. The musical offering contains 12 pieces of a theme by Frederick the Great of Prussia, and the art of the fugue systematically demonstrates all types of fugal writing. Bach assembled his Mass in B minor from his existing works and newly composed movements. He employed contrasting styles and demonstrated different current approaches to writing church music. Bach synthesized into his works all the genres, styles, and forms of the time. By the last decades of his life, some considered his music old-fashioned and difficult. In the 19th century, his music appealed to a broader audience of connoisseurs and amateurs alike. George Frederick Handel, 1685 to 1759, won international renown and success with the public during his lifetime, and his music has been performed ever since. He was born in Germany, and he studied music of German and Italian composers. In 1703, he moved to Hamburg, played in an opera orchestra, and composed his first opera. He traveled to Italy, where he associated with the leading patrons and musicians. Handel's greatest success came in London, where he served aristocratic and royal patrons, as well as a public audience. Although he wrote many instrumental works, Handel is best known for his Italian operas and English oratorios. Handel composed and directed operas for most of his career. In his operas, Handel combined French overtures and dances, Italian-style recitatives and arias, and German elements of counterpoint and orchestration. Handel's Rinaldo, 1711, was the first Italian opera composed for London and established his reputation. Handel was the musical director for the Royal Academy of Music, formed in 1718 to 1719 by wealthy gentlemen with the support of the king. He employed the two types of recitative in Italian opera: recitativo simplis, the simple recitative, later recitative secco, which was accompanied by the basso continuo only, and recitativo obbligato, later recitativo accompagnato, or accompanied recitative, which involved the orchestra. Handel wrote arias for specific singers in a wide variety of types, including some with coloratura, which is florid ornamentation. The best music was saved for the prima donna. In his operas, Handel sometimes used instrumental sinfonias or ballets. He moved the plot forward in his opera by freely combining recitative, arias, ariosos, and orchestral passages. This and his characteristic combination of national elements are apparent in Julio Caesar. Handel and a partner formed a new opera company in 1729. Although he continued writing operas until 1741, he never achieved the same success with opera that he had with his earlier works. In the 1730s, Handel devised the English oratorio, a combination of the Italian oratorio and opera traditions with French, German, and English influences. The chorus was given a more active role in the story. His choral style is dramatic but simpler and consistently less contrapuntal than Bach's. The oratorios were performed in theaters, usually during Lent, but Saul was premiered during the 1738-1739 opera season in place of a new opera. It exemplifies the blending of genres in his oratorios. After the great success of Messiah in 1741 to 1742, Handel stopped composing operas and focused on oratorios, which were less expensive to present and were popular with audiences. Oratorios were meant for the concert hall, and their librettos were primarily based on the Old Testament. Like his contemporaries, Handel borrowed and reworked existing music using material that was well suited to its new purpose. Handel wrote a great deal of instrumental music, much of which is published in London and used in home music making. Handel wrote a great deal of instrumental music, much of which was published in London and used in home music making. Handel's two most popular instrumental works, Water Music and Music for the Royal Fireworks, are suites for orchestra or winds that he composed for the king. Although Handel mixed tradition and innovation in his concertos, they tend toward a retrospective style. Handel became a national figure for the English, and some of his oratorios were the first pieces to have an unbroken tradition of performance from the time that they were composed to the present. For your 25-point quiz, know about Antonio Vivaldi, know about Concerti Grossi, know about Torelli, know about ritornello form, know about Francois Couperin, know about Jean-Philippe Rameau, know about Lully, know about Johann Sebastian Bach. Know about the well-tempered clavier. Know about fugues. Know about Bach's instrumental works. Know about Bach's cantatas and his Mass in B minor. Know about George Frederick Handel. Know about the different forms of recitative. Know about Handel's operas and his arias. Know about Handel's oratorios and how he blended styles. And that ought to do it.